Welcome to part 2 of this Blender sculpting tutorial series where we're creating this cartoon stylized squid character. If you haven't watched part 1 where we sculpt the squid, then definitely check that out with the link in the description. And in this part we are going to be using the vertex paint to paint the squid, and then we'll do the materials, the lighting, and the rendering and the compositing to get the finished artwork. And if you'd like to purchase the finished project files as well as help support the channel, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. Links are in the description. Now, just like in part 1 where I did the sculpting, I'm also going to be using my screen drawing tablet for the vertex painting. And I definitely would recommend using a drawing tablet if you're able to, because computer mice are kind of made to just like move around and click on different buttons on the screen. But with a drawing tablet, you have better posture and you're able to use the pen pressure and make nice smooth strokes. And I think you can get a better result using a drawing tablet, but if you only have a mouse, then you can still follow along with the tutorial with a mouse. And if you're interested in purchasing a drawing tablet, then you can check out my Amazon affiliate links in the description to some tablets that I recommend, and those are affiliate links, so if you purchase something through those links, that will help me out, but with no extra cost to you. So let's get started with the vertex painting. So I'm just going to select the squid object, and then I'm going to click here on object mode, and let's change this over to the vertex paint. So on default, it is going to be a white color, and if for some reason your matte cap is colored, then it is best to click right here to change the matte cap and change it to some matte cap color, which is very white. So I think I'll change it to this one just because I don't want the matte cap color to be messing up with the color of my painting. So the vertex painting is a little bit different than texture painting, because with vertex painting, you're actually using the geometry of the mesh to paint the object. So if your object is very detailed and high poly like this sculpt, then the vertex painting will work really well. However, if you have a very low poly object, then the vertex painting really just won't work that well. So I'm going to start by choosing the color that I want for the base color. So let's click on the white color here, and then I'm going to make it a very bright red, but not super strong, like not all the way down here. I'm going to make it a little bit less saturated, so a bit more towards the white. So something like that is pretty good. And then once you've set the base color that you want, you can click here on paint and you can click on the set vertex colors, and that is going to fill the entire thing with that red color. So I now want to paint in a few of the other areas with a lighter kind of tannish orangey color. So I'll click here on the color, and I'm going to bring this up here, make it fully white, and make it kind of a tannish kind of orangish color, a bit more yellow, something like that. And then what I can do here on the strength is just turn this way down so that it is much more subtle, and then I can navigate up here and I can just start to go along here and just painting that in, just kind of tapping very lightly because I don't want it to be too strong, but just kind of filling that in. And actually I think I'm going to click here on the color, and I'm going to make this a bit more towards the white so it's a bit brighter, and then I can go along there and just fill that all in. And so I'm just making this area on the octopus a little bit brighter, so it's kind of almost like a gradient, so it's going to be red here, and then it just gets a bit lighter as it kind of comes up here. And also let's take this color and let's make it a bit more like an orangey color, and I can go along here and just make this a bit more orange. And right over here, let's add a bit more color over here. Also up here, maybe make my brush a little bit smaller, and we'll also add some color down there. And then even though I'm not really going to be seeing the back of it in the final render, I do want to just paint the back. So I'll go here to the back, and I'll just paint along there, paint this going down there. And then I do want to blur this just a little bit just to make it a bit more even. So if I press the T key to open the side panel here, I can choose the blur or the smear. I think I'm going to choose the blur, and then I can make my brush bigger, and I can just go along here kind of in circles and kind of blur that just a little bit. I could also try the smear, so let me try the smear one, see how that is. I think the smear effect is a bit stronger, so I might want to use the smear. All right, go here to the front and kind of smear that just to kind of smooth it out. All right, that is pretty good. So I'm going to click here on the color, and I'm going to make it kind of that tan color, and then I'll go down here and I'm going to start to color this area in here. So pretty much wherever the suckers are, that is where I want it to be the lighter color. And I'll go here to the draw brush, and I can turn the strength up a little bit, and then I can go along here and just make it that lighter color. So I'll make this all the lighter color, and over here lighter as well, all right there. Then I can kind of go over here to each side of the tentacle and just go down here and make it lighter down in there. And also I think I'll turn the strength down a little bit because that's a bit too strong, and then I can just press down and just kind of paint all along there. And also on the very bottoms of the tentacle, kind of on the very end, I do want that to be a bit lighter all around. Very subtle though, so I'm just kind of tapping lightly on the end, but then mainly right here where the suckers are, I want that to be a bit brighter. So you might need to make your brush a bit smaller by pressing the F key to change the size of your brush. So I'll just go along there, make that a bit brighter, kind of in there. It's almost like sort of a gradient, so the inside is going to be that lighter color. So we'll go down here along this one. All right, let's go to the next one here. So I'll go right over here. I'll do this one here. And I need to make my strength a little bit stronger here on the brush and then paint that up there. Just go along that arm there. All right, and up here, I want to make all this that lighter color. Just fill that all in there, and then we can kind of go back and just make that a bit stronger of a color. Also here on this end, I need to make that a bit brighter, and over here. And these ones here, I'll just kind of paint along here, paint these manually because they're kind of in a different spot. And that is something that I want to do. I think it's kind of cool just to make these a lighter color. So I'll just kind of paint along here, just make it kind of a subtle lighter color. So on some of these ones that are just kind of randomly around, like these ones over here, I'm just going to paint that slightly lighter just to add a bit of variation. Let's go over here. These ones could be a bit lighter. And also right here on the back of him, we can make that a bit lighter. Let's press Control S to save the file again. All right, make that a bit lighter. So back inside here, we'll make all these suckers a bit lighter color. And then right here at the very bottom, I can turn the strength way down and then just lightly tap along here and make the end of the arm or the end of the tentacle a bit lighter. So I think I will turn the strength down quite a bit, and then I'll zoom out and I'll just lightly tap around here, kind of to make a gradient so that the bottom here, the bottom of the arms or the tentacles are a bit lighter. All right, now another thing that I want to add, if I zoom here to the top, I want to add a little bit of a darker area right in there. So I'll make my brush a bit smaller. And if I go here to the color, I want to make this kind of like a brown color. So I'll make it towards the orange and then make it a bit darker. And I can turn the strength up a bit. And maybe here on the color, I might want to make this a bit darker. So I can zoom in, and then that's actually a bit too strong. So I'll undo that with Control Z. I'm going to turn the strength down a bit, and then I can go along here in circles and just kind of darken this area in because it's kind of going back in. So I just want to darken these areas a bit, going along there. Also right down here, kind of darkening that in there, and over here, darkening that in. And also right up here, we'll do this one here, darkening that in. Let's go around to the back as well and do some of these. So we'll darken this one in. All right, now I want to take this color and I want to make it fully black. And then what I'm going to do is turn the strength down even more so it's very subtle. So what I can do is just make my brush really small, and I can go along the creases and just make that a bit darker, and that is gonna sort of add like an ambient occlusion kind of look where the creases are a bit darker, and so it'll kind of make the creases look like they're going back in a bit more. And I will actually be using something in the material setup to kind of make this effect a little bit stronger, but right here kind of around the eyes, I thought it would be nice just to make it slightly darker. So go along there, make that a little bit darker, and along here along the bottom of the eyes, just make that a bit darker there. I'll go right in here, make that a bit darker. All right, so I'm gonna call this finished for the painting. So I'm just gonna click here on vertex paint. Let's go back to object mode, and I can press Control S to save. And now that I'm done using my drawing tablet, I'll bring this over to my larger monitor here in the center. All right, so I brought this over to my main monitor, and with this object selected, I'm going to use the object context menu to shade this object smooth. And then over here on the rendering engine, I am going to be using the Cycles rendering engine. However, you can use Eevee if you want to, but I'll be using Cycles. So before we do the materials, I do want to set up some lighting so that we can actually see what the material looks like. So let's first go down here to the color management, and I'm going to use the view transform of Filmic, and this will help the exposure to be more realistic. And then also here on the look, I'm going to change this to very high contrast to just bring out the colors and make it more saturated. And then let's also click over here on the world properties, and I am going to be adding in a free HDRI from polyhaven.com, so I'll have a link in the description to the same HDRI that I'll be using if you'd like to download it. So let's click here on this yellow dot next to color, and I'm going to choose environment texture, and then I can click on the open button. And here's the HDRI that I'm going to be using, so I'll have a link in the description to this free HDRI if you'd like to download it. And I downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version. And then we can just click on open image. So now if I hold down the Z button and move my mouse into the rendered view, we can just see that in the rendered mode. And then also to make the background transparent so we can't actually see it, we can click right over here on the render properties, and we want to open up the film tab, and we can check mark the transparent button. And then let's close that. So now let's add the eyes. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and go back to solid view, and I will press Shift A, and I'm going to go here to mesh, and for the eyes, I'm going to add a UV sphere. Let's hit the tab key to go into edit mode. I'll hit G to grab, I'll move this down, and then hit the S key to scale, and G to grab. And we're just going to put this here in the eye socket. You can also press the period on the numpad just to zoom in to the object. And then I want to rotate this object, and I'll rotate it on the X-axis. I'll type in 90 and enter to rotate it over sideways. And then I can just bring bring it here and I'm going to put it in the eye socket and kind of scale it down. Just make it a bit smaller, just like that. And then I want to click over here on the modifier properties and let's click on add modifier. And under generate, I'm going to add the mirror modifier so that it mirrors it over to the other side. And then I also want to hold down the Alt key and I'll just select this loop right here. And then I can hold down the Shift and Alt key and select this loop here. And then just hold down the Shift key and select this loop here. So I'll press S to scale and I'll scale that up. And then I can hold down the Alt key and just select that loop right there. And I will scale this down a bit. And then I can also double tap the G key. That'll activate the edge slide and I can bring that down. And then I will hit the Tab key to go back to object mode. Let's use the object context menu to shade this smooth. And then to give it more geometry, I'm going to press Ctrl 2, and Ctrl 2 is going to add the subdivision surface modifier. And then let's hit the Tab key to go back into edit mode. And I want to sharpen this up by adding a loop cut. So I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut. I'll left click and then drag this over, bring it in close, and then left click again. And then if I go back to object mode, you can see we have some nice eyes there. So I'll tab to go back into edit mode, and I'll select everything with the A key, and I'm going to scale this up and just move it over. And then I can double tap the R key, and double tapping the R key will use the trackball rotation, and I can just kind of rotate the eyes, kind of scale them up a bit, and kind of just stick them right in there. Just kind of make them even in the center there of the eye sockets. All right, that's pretty good. Press Ctrl S to save. And now let's do the materials. So I'll select the squid main object and let's click over here on the shading workspace, and I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered mode. And then I can click on new here to add a new material, and let's just call this squid. Now you can see the vertex painting isn't showing up. That's because we need to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and we're going to search for the color attribute node. Let's put this here, and then we want to click on the drop down and we want to choose the attribute because this is the color data that we painted. Then let's take the color and put that into the base color, and we can actually see how that's looking. So that is looking really quite nice. Now I want to add kind of a stronger ambient occlusion effect. So what I'll do is press Shift A, go to the search, and I'm going to search for the geometry node, and let's drop this right here. And then I want to take this pointiness value and I'll put that up to the base color so you can see it. Now this pointiness value, it will not work in the material preview, so you won't be able to see it. And also you won't be able to see it in the rendered mode if you are using Blender Eevee. So basically the pointiness value just won't work in Blender Eevee. So if you are using Eevee, you could instead search for the ambient occlusion node. And let's put the color up to the base color just so I can see that. And you can see the ambient occlusion is going to make kind of the crevices and creases kind of darker, although it doesn't work quite as well as the pointiness. I do like the pointiness value better. But to actually see that better, I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search and I'll search for a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp right here between the ambient occlusion color and the base color. And I can now drag these two values together, and that's going to make it more contrasty. So you can see if I drag this really close, you can see kind of these creases are a bit darker. So if you're using Blender Eevee, then you could use the ambient occlusion node instead. However, I'm going to be using the geometry node instead. So I'll select the ambient occlusion, X to delete it, and then let's take this color ramp, bring this up here, and I'm going to take the pointiness value of the geometry node and put that into the base color. So now if I drag these colors around, you can see what it's doing. So if I drag these like really close to each other, you can really see what it's doing. And I really like the pointiness value a lot better. You can see it's darker around those edges. It's also darker around there, and I think it just works a lot better than the ambient occlusion node. So I'm going to actually flip these values. So I'll flip these two values so that the white is over here and then the black is over here, and I'll just play around with those colors. So something like that. But then I actually want to drag the white a bit closer so it is a bit brighter. So I now want to mix the color ramp in with the color attribute, and that way there will just be kind of that ambient occlusion effect and some parts will be darker. So I'll press Shift A, I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the mix color node, and let's put this here after the color ramp. And then I want the color attribute to be going into color A, and then I want to take this color and I want to put that into the factor. And the factor is controlling where it's going to be color A and where it's going to be color B. So you can see most of it is the red color, but now we can take color B and we can make this very dark, and I'm going to make it very dark and then make it kind of an orange color so that it is a brown color. And now you can see that all those little creases there have that darker color. And you can play around with the color ramp if you want to make it more strong or less strong. Now I also want to make it a bit more shiny, so here on this roughness, I'll just turn this down to like a 0.4 so it's a bit more shiny. And then I do want to add just a little bit of subsurface to make it look a bit more fleshy. So let's take the subsurface here and I'll turn it to like a 0.1. And then here on the subsurface color, I want to make this kind of a reddish orangey color. So just something like that so it looks a bit more fleshy. And then I also want to add just a little bit of surface bump. So I'll press Shift A, I'll go to the search. I'm going to search for the noise texture, and let's drop the noise texture down here. I'll also press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the texture coordinate node. Let's take the texture coordinate, put it here, and I want to use the object coordinates. So let's put the object into the vector, and this will help to place the noise texture on the object more evenly. And then let's take this factor here of the noise texture and we'll put that into the normal of the principled shader. But then I need to convert this to normal data because this is color data, but then this is normal data. So I'll press Shift A, I'll go here to the search, and I'll search for the bump node, and let's put that in between the noise texture and the principled shader. And then to actually convert this to normal data, we want the factor to be going into the height value. So the noise texture is now making the surface look all bumpy, but it is way too strong. So I'm going to turn the strength down to like a 0.06, so it's much less strong. And then I do want to change some of the settings because I want it to be a bit more detailed. So I'll first turn the scale to like a 2, and then the detail, I'll turn that all the way to the max of 15. And also here the roughness, I will turn that to a 0.6, so there's a bit more roughness. So now if I zoom in really closely, you can see there's just a little bit of surface detail. So that is it for the squid material. So I'm now going to click on the eyes here. Let's click on new to add a new material, and I can just call this eyes white. And this material is going to be very simple. Here on the base color, I just want to make it fully white, and here on the roughness, I want to turn that to 0. So I'm now going to hold down the Z button and go back to solid view, and I will hit the tab key to go into edit mode, and I want to just select the part where the pupil is going to be. So to select the pupil, I can just click on the center vertex, and then I can press the Control plus. So Control plus, Control plus, and Control plus until all those loops are selected. So let's click here on the material, and I want to click on the plus here to add a new material to this object. So click on the plus here and then click on new, and I can just call this like black eyes. So then for this color, I want to make the base color fully black, and I want to take the roughness and turn that all the way to 0. And then with that part selected, we can click on the assign button. So if I now go back to object mode and go up into the rendered view, you can see the squid now has those eyes. Let's press Ctrl S to save the file. So I now want to click here on the layout, and I want to add a camera. So I will press Shift A, let's go down here, and we're going to add a camera, and then I can move my view to where I want the camera to be, and I will press Ctrl Alt Numpad 0 to bring the camera to where I am. And with the camera selected, I can hit G to grab to move it around. And then if I click here on the object data properties to go to the camera settings, I'm going to turn the focal length up to 80 just to kind of zoom the camera in so it looks a bit more flat. I can also hit the G key to grab, then I can double tap the Z key to move it in or out, and I'll just bring it out like that. And then I also want to make the image going up and down instead of back and forth. So I'll click here on the render properties, actually over here on the output properties. And then here on the resolution, I can drag the Y value, and I'm going to make this much bigger and then drag this down like that. Or you can also drag this resolution if this is a too big resolution. So I will hit G to grab, then G to grab, and double tap the Z key to bring it back. And I'll just bring it to like that. And then I can click and drag just to box select the two objects, so the eye and the squid. And I can rotate it, I'll move it over, and I can also rotate it on the Z axis and just have the squid kind of looking over sideways. And then I can also double tap the R key to use the trackball rotation, and I can also scale this if I want to. So I'm just going to rotate that just like that. And then in the camera view, I'm going to press Ctrl B, and that's going to add this box here, and I can click and drag just to box select around the camera. So now if I hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view, it's just going to render what the camera can see. So it's not rendering anything else out here. So I now want to add some bubbles. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to mesh, and to make the bubbles, I'm going to add a UV sphere. And then using the object context menu, I can shade that smooth. And for this, I'm going to go back over to the shading workspace, and I'll hit G to grab, kind of move this over here. And I can hold down the Z button and go into the rendered mode. So with this object selected, let's click on new here, and I can rename this to bubbles. This material is going to be very simple. So here on the base color, I'll click on this and I'll make it fully white. And then here on the color, I'm going to make this kind of like a light blue color. And then here on the roughness, I want to turn this to 0 so it's very shiny. And then to actually be able to see through this, I'm going to turn the transmission value all the way to 1. So now it looks like a bubble. And also we can change the IOR value to make it look more like a bubble. So I'm going to change the IOR value to a 1.15. So that just looks a bit better, and it makes it a bit harder to see the HDRI in the background. So I can now click back here to go to the layout, and I can now scale this down, and I can just make a few bubbles in the scene. So I want to bring the bubbles a bit farther back, and then in the camera view I can just make a few bubbles here and there. So I'll press Shift D to duplicate and S to scale, just kind of scale that down, and I can select the bubbles and just continue to press Shift D to duplicate and scale them and move them. And I just want to make a few random bubbles here and there. So I'm just gonna place these around so he looks like he's in the ocean, in the water. Maybe also make a few bubbles kind of around there. And we'll do a couple more up here, and then duplicate that, and we'll make one here. And I'm just scaling them as well to make each one kind of a random size. All right, so we are ready to render the final image, and then we'll do the compositing. So if I click up here on the render properties, I'm gonna go here to the sampling, and here on the render samples, I'll just use 100 samples. So you can press Ctrl S again to save the Blender file, and then to render this, you can press F12, or you can click on render, and then click on render image. All right, so it's finished, so we can now just do some compositing. So I'm going to click here on the compositing workspace. I'll click on use nodes to add the compositing nodes, and I can drag this down because I don't need the timeline. So I first want to denoise the image, so I'll press Shift A, I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the denoise node, and let's drop this here, and then I want to change the accurate to fast so it just goes a bit faster. And then I'm also going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for the viewer node, let's drop this here, and I can take the denoise image and we'll put that into the viewer just so that we can see the image in the background. You can also press V to zoom out the image, and then Alt V to zoom the image in. I'm also going to hold down the Alt key and then middle click with my mouse wheel and drag this over here, and then I can have the compositing nodes right over here. So I kind of want to add like a shadow behind the squid. So I'll press Shift A, I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the blur node, and let's drop the blur node down here, and then I can put the image into the image of the viewer. And then I want to take the render layers image and let's put that into the image here of the blur. Now here on the blur X and Y, I want to change both of these values to 150 just to blur that. And then I want to make this shadow very dark, so I'll press Shift A, I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the hue saturation value, and let's put this here after the blur, and then this value I can turn to 0, so now you can see we basically have just this blurred shadow. So I want to drag these two nodes over here, and then I want to mix the denoised image in with the shadow. So I'll press Shift A, I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the alpha over node, and let's just drop this here, and then let's take the hue saturation value, and I'll put that into the top one, and this denoise, let's put that into the bottom one. And then I can plug the image up to the composite and the viewer so that we can preview that. And so now you can see there's that little black area behind the octopus. So now I want to create a background. So I'll press Shift A, I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the box mask. Let's drop this here, and I can drag it out to make it a bit bigger. And then I want to click and drag these two values, the width and the height. And if you select the box mask, you can actually see the box right here in the preview. So I'm going to drag this maybe to about here, and then the height I'm going to drag kind of to about here. And so this box mask is just going to be black and white. If I take the mask and just plug that into the image here on the viewer, we can see what it is. So it's just black and white. So I now want to blur this. So I'm going to click on the blur node. I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and I'm going to drop it right here after the box mask. And then if I click on the X and then drag down to the Y and then let go, I can type in one value for both of the values at the same time, and I'm going to type in 1000. So it will take a bit to load up, but it is really going to blur that, and so it's going to make a nice gradient for the background. And then I don't want it to be black and white, so to change the colors, I'll press Shift A, I'll go to the search, and I'll search for the color ramp, and let's put the color ramp here after the blur. So I can now click on the black tab, and for this color, I'm going to make it a bit brighter, and I'm going to make it kind of like a dark blue color. And then here for the white color, I'll click on this color, and this one I'm going to make kind of like a light blue. And it might take a moment to load up because of this blur here. And if you rendered your image at a smaller size, you may not need to use this much blur, but as you can see, I just wanted a really nice background with that lighter color and then the dark blue. So I now just want to mix the background in with the squid. So I'll click on this alpha over node, I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, drop it here, and then I can click and drag to select the composite and the viewer and drop them here. And I want to put this image from the alpha over into both the viewer and the composite. So now this alpha over can be used to mix both of the images together. So I'll take this alpha over here, this has the squid image, and I'll put this into the bottom one, and then this color ramp here, that is going to go into the top one. And then just make sure that this final alpha over is going into the composite and the viewer. So let's just click on the viewer node, and then we're just going to wait for this to composite. And there we have it. So there is the final image. So then to save the final image, just select the viewer node. You can press the N key to open up the side panel. And if you click right up here on the node tab, you can then click on save this image if the viewer node is selected. And I'm just going to rename this to Squid. And then right up here, you can also choose the file format. And then let's click on save as image. And then I will press F11, and that is going to go to the render result. I'll click here and I'll click on the viewer node, and this is another way to save the image. You can click on image and click on save as image and save it that way. And there is the finished render. So this is going to wrap it up for this sculpting squid character tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed following this tutorial, and thank you for watching. And if you enjoy these tutorials and you'd like to help support me and this channel, then some great ways to do that are by checking out my Gumroad store and my Patreon page and the YouTube memberships. I'll have all the links in the description. And if you'd like to learn more about sculpting in Blender, then definitely check out my sculpting tutorial playlist with the link in the description, and I have many more sculpting tutorials. But I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.